Everyone laughed the moment he walked through the ballroom doors. Even his own relatives whispered that he looked tired, worn out, and completely defeated. But 10 minutes later, the entire room fell silent when one of the richest men in America crossed the crowded floor, ignored everyone else, and hugged the single father they had spent the whole evening mocking. For 5 years, Daniel Carter had avoided family reunions, not because he hated his family, but because every visit felt like an interview he could never pass. His cousins compared promotions, his uncles compared houses, his aunts compared vacations, and somehow, every conversation ended with someone asking Daniel why life hadn't worked out for him. He was 38 years old, lived in a small rented duplex outside Columbus, Ohio, and worked as a maintenance technician at a public school. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, barely. Every morning started before sunrise. He packed lunches, made breakfast, woke up his 9-year-old daughter Lily, braided her hair after watching online tutorials for weeks, then rushed to work before the first school bell. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness. Since then, Daniel had become both mom and dad. He missed birthdays because of overtime. He skipped buying new clothes so Lily could join soccer. Every dollar had a purpose. Every decision came with sacrifice. Still, he smiled whenever Lily smiled. That made everything worth it. When his older sister insisted he attend the annual Carter family reunion, Daniel almost said no. "You've hidden long enough," she told him. "It's not hiding. Then prove it." So on a warm Saturday evening, Daniel borrowed his neighbor's freshly washed sedan, ironed the only dress shirt he owned, and drove to the luxury hotel where nearly 200 relatives had gathered. The moment he walked inside, he knew he'd made a mistake. Designer suits, expensive watches, luxury handbags, people talking about investment properties, startups, and European vacations. Daniel quietly found a corner table. Lily squeezed his hand. "You, okay, Dad?" "I'm great." She looked at him with the expression children use when they know adults are pretending. Across the room, his cousin Brandon spotted him. "Well, look who finally showed up." Several relatives turned around. Brandon walked over with the confidence of someone who measured people by their bank accounts. "Still fixing broken toilets at schools." Daniel smiled politely. "Mostly air conditioners." Brandon laughed loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Close enough." Others chuckled. Another cousin joined in. "I heard single parenting is expensive." "It is. So when are you going to find a wife who can help?" Daniel stayed calm. "Lily and I are doing just fine." Brandon looked around dramatically. "You hear that? He's doing just fine." More laughter. Lily lowered her eyes toward the floor. Daniel noticed. That hurt far more than the jokes. Dinner began. People shared career updates. One cousin had sold his software company. Another had become a surgeon. Someone else had bought a vacation home in Florida. When Daniel's turn came, the room grew unusually quiet. "So, Daniel," an uncle asked, "what's new with you?" He took a slow breath. "I've been working hard raising Lily and trying to give her a good life." Silence. Then Brandon smirked. "So basically, nothing." Several people laughed again. Daniel forced another smile, because sometimes protecting your child means swallowing your pride. Lily reached under the table and held his hand. That simple gesture reminded him why he kept going every day. After dinner, guests wandered into the grand ballroom where a charity auction was about to begin. A famous billionaire businessman named Richard Whitmore had been invited as the evening's guest speaker because he donated millions to local education programs. Everyone crowded near the entrance, hoping for a photo. Phones came out. People practiced introductions. Brandon adjusted his expensive tie. "If I can get 5 minutes with Whitmore, it'll be worth coming tonight." Luxury cars pulled up outside. Security entered first. Then, Richard Whitmore stepped into the ballroom. Conversation stopped instantly. He greeted organizers politely before scanning the room. People expected him to head toward the stage. Instead, he looked past the crowd. His eyes stopped on Daniel. For a second, nobody understood. Then the billionaire smiled. A genuine smile. He walked straight through hundreds of guests, ignoring every outstretched hand. ignoring every person calling his name. The ballroom became strangely quiet. Daniel looked behind himself, assuming Richard was greeting someone else. But there was nobody there. Richard stopped directly in front of him. Daniel Carter. Daniel stood slowly. Yes, without another word, Richard wrapped him in a hug. A real hug. Not the kind people give for cameras. The room froze. Richard stepped back with watery eyes. I've been looking for you for years. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry. Have we met? Richard laughed softly. You don't remember me. Daniel searched his face. Nothing. Richard turned toward the audience. I'd like everyone's attention. The room became completely silent. 20 years ago, Richard began. I wasn't a billionaire. I was a broke college student working nights as a janitor. Daniel stared in confusion. Richard continued. One winter evening, I lost my wallet. I had no money, no food, and honestly, I was thinking about dropping out of school. Guests listened without moving. I sat outside a small diner, trying to figure out what to do. Then a young mechanic walked out after finishing his shift. He noticed I hadn't eaten. He invited me inside. He bought me dinner. He refused to let me pay him back. Daniel's eyes slowly widened. Richard smiled. That mechanic was Daniel. Soft whispers spread across the ballroom. I told him I'd repay him someday. He laughed and said something I'll never forget. Richard looked directly at Daniel. You said, if life ever gives you more than you need, help someone else instead. Daniel finally remembered. A freezing night. A hungry stranger. One meal. Nothing more. I've repeated those words in nearly every speech I've ever given, Richard said. They became the foundation of my company's charity programs. The audience stood completely still. Richard reached into his jacket. I searched for Daniel for years. I wanted to thank the man who reminded me that kindness has value even when nobody is watching. Brandon's confident smile had disappeared. Richard continued. I recently found him through an old employment record. I accepted tonight's invitation only because I learned he'd be here. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Richard handed Daniel a small envelope. I can't repay what you did. Daniel shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I know. Richard smiled. This isn't repayment. It's an opportunity. Daniel slowly opened the envelope. Inside was an official letter. Richard's foundation was launching a nationwide scholarship program for children who had lost a parent. The program would be named after Daniel's late wife, and Daniel was being offered the position of National Community Director. The salary was more than 4 times what he'd ever earned. Full benefits. Flexible hours. Enough to finally spend evenings with Lily instead of working overtime. Daniel couldn't speak. Neither could Lily. Tears rolled down her face. Richard knelt beside her. Your dad changed my life before anyone knew my name. You should be very proud of him. Lily hugged her father as tightly as she could. I always have been. Across the ballroom, relatives who had mocked Daniel moments earlier suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. Brandon quietly slipped his phone into his pocket. For the first time that evening, he had absolutely nothing to say. One elderly aunt wiped away tears. I never knew. Daniel smiled gently. That's because I never thought it mattered. Richard looked around the room. It matters. Success isn't measured by who notices your kindness. It's measured by whether you choose kindness before anyone is watching. The audience erupted into applause. Not for the billionaire. For the quiet single father who had spent years believing nobody saw his sacrifices. Over the following months, Daniel accepted the new role. He traveled across the country helping families who were rebuilding after unimaginable loss. He created scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities, community support groups. Every project carried the same message that had once been spoken in a tiny diner decades earlier. If life gives you more than you need, help someone else. Lily watched her father speak at schools and charity events, not because he wanted attention, because he wanted fewer children to feel alone. One evening, after another successful fundraiser, Lily asked him a question while they sat on their front porch watching the sunset. Dad, did you know buying that stranger dinner would change everything? Daniel smiled. Not at all. So why did you do it? He looked toward the fading sky. Because sometimes people don't need someone rich. They just need someone willing to care. Lily rested her head on his shoulder. For years, Daniel believed his greatest achievement was surviving each day as a single father. He eventually discovered it was something much bigger. The smallest act of kindness, offered without expecting anything in return, can quietly travel through someone else's life for years before finding its way back home.